In the Kirindy forest of western Madagascar, an hour before first light, a male fossa climbs to the worn horizontal branch his kind has returned to for generations, the mating tree where the females wait. In a cave pool of Tsingy de Bemaraha, a Nile crocodile holds where the sun never reaches. Far south, at the Kirindy field station, a radio receiver clicks once, then falls silent. Madagascar has drifted alone for 88 million years, so 9 in 10 of its mammals live nowhere else on Earth. How does an island build its own top predator, then lose 4/5 of its forest before anyone thinks to count it? What follows runs across 5 chapters: the stone forests where nothing arrived by land, the cat the island built from a mongoose, the 1994 collaring, the lemurs that scream its name, and one tree where a season turns. Dawn light rakes low across a field of limestone blades, and the plateau resolves into something that should not hold a forest. This is Tsingy de Bemaraha, a UNESCO karst plateau in western Madagascar, where rainwater has cut the rock into pinnacles sharp enough that the Malagasy word Tsingy describes ground where one cannot walk barefoot. Between the blades, pockets of forest sit sealed from one another, islands inside an island, each reachable only by what can climb or fly. Madagascar broke from the last of Gondwana and has drifted alone for 88 million years. And in that long isolation, 9 in 10 of its mammals became creatures found nowhere else. Nothing here arrived across a land bridge. Every lineage living among these stones rafted on storm debris, drifted on a current, or crossed on the wind. And then it stayed, and it changed. Each sealed pocket became its own slow experiment in survival, running for tens of millions of years without interruption. If nothing walked across the sea to reach this island, who became its hunters? Below the sun-blasted pinnacles, the rock opens downward into flooded caves where daylight never reaches. A headlamp beam crosses black water, and 2 eyes return it. The Nile crocodile persists in Madagascar's rivers and, stranger still, in the cave systems of Tsingy, the island's only large reptilian hunter of the waterways, holding in pools that the sun has never touched. Some of these crocodiles reach 4 meters, relics of a lineage far older than the island that now conceals them. Surveying these passages falls to rangers of Madagascar national parks, who walk the cave margins by headlamp and fix a camera trap above a pool to record the animals no one watches by day. The work is patient and unhurried. A beam, a logbook, a memory card recovered weeks later showing a crocodile easing out of the dark and back into it. The island keeps its largest predators in the places people reach least, and the record of them gathers 1 frame at a time. Back where the canopy closes over the stone, the island's stranger experiments come into the light. A slab of bark blinks. A leaf-tailed gecko resolves out of the trunk it had seemed to be, its flattened body and ragged margins erasing the line between animal and wood. Geckos like this one hold to humid, undisturbed forest, and a body fitted so exactly to bark and dead leaf is itself a measure of canopy left intact. Lower down, among the leaf litter, a smaller specialist answers a different problem. The lowland streaked tenrec carries a coat of loose black and yellow quills, and it stridulates, rubbing a cluster of them together to make a faint call that keeps a foraging family in contact. It belongs to a single insectivore lineage that reached Madagascar once and then radiated across the island into bodies that recall hedgehogs, shrews and otters. One arrival answered many ways. Across the island, this one lineage produced more than 30 species, a single answer multiplied into a family. When the light goes, a different specialist begins to work. In the dark, a long, bony middle finger taps along a dead branch, pauses, taps again. The eye moves through the canopy, tapping wood and listening, reading the echo for the hollow that means a grub beneath the surface, then gnawing through the bark with ever-growing incisors and hooking the larva out with that thin, elongated finger. It is the work a woodpecker does elsewhere, performed by a nocturnal lemur on an island no woodpecker ever reached, a missing role filled from the material at hand. High above by day, the Madagascar serpent eagle, seldom seen and once thought lost to science, hunts the same layered canopy for prey of its own. And across all of it, at the base of a single trunk, a line of clawed tracks presses into the bark and climbs, then returns to the ground the wrong way, head first, the descent of the only hunter the island built to come down a tree face down, already gone into the dark ahead. In the dry, deciduous woodland of the Minabe region, across roughly 12,500 hectares of leafless canopy and pale, fallen bark, a movement carries along a horizontal limb, low and fluid, a body the length of a small cat traveling without sound. The forest holds its breath through the dry season, the trees stripped back to grey architecture, and against that bareness, the shape reads first as motion rather than animal. A long spine flowing forward, a tail trailing as a counterweight, the limbs reaching and folding in a rhythm that belongs neither to cat nor to dog. Only when the body pauses does the taxonomy resolve. This is the fossa, a name the English language borrowed from the Malagasy fossa, and it stands as the largest carnivore on Madagascar, an animal of 5 to 10 kilograms wrapped in a russet coat. It is not a cat, though every line of it argues otherwise. It belongs to the euplerids, a family found nowhere else on Earth, descended from a mongoose-like ancestor that reached the island, and, across millions of years of isolation, drifted toward the shape of a predator the island otherwise lacked. The resemblance is convergence, not kinship, and it makes the fossa one of the clearest living records of what isolation can build. The proof arrives at the trunk. The fossa reaches a vertical stem and descends it head first, a feat that announces an architecture the body has been hiding. The ankle joints reverse, rotating the hind feet backward until the claws point up the trunk and grip against the weight of the descent. And the semi-retractile claws hold while the spine controls the slide downward. No cat moves through trees this way. The fossa hunts the tree-dwelling lemurs of Kirindy, the sifaka that bound between trunks, and the brown lemurs that feed in the higher branches, pursuing them through the canopy along routes a heavier predator could never follow. It hunts by day and by night across a home range that stretches for kilometers, a single animal moving through a great volume of forest, present everywhere and seen almost nowhere. What is known about that movement is known mostly through machines left waiting in the dark. At dusk, a Kirindy ranger crouches beside a camera trap strapped to a trunk, checking the housing, wiping the lens, resetting the infrared trigger that will fire when a warm body crosses the beam. On the playback screen, the descent appears in monochrome, the fossa pouring head first down the bark frame by frame, the reversed hind feet catching the light as pale points against the grain. Across the dry forest, these traps are arranged in grids, dozens of units logging passages no observer could stay awake to record. And it is from this accumulation of triggered frames, night after night, season after season, that researchers have assembled most of what is understood about how the fossa travels, where its range overlaps, and how often it moves. The animal writes its own record in infrared, and the rangers read it back. Lower in the same forest, on a thin branch within reach of the light, a panther chameleon shifts its color, the greens deepening and the bands brightening across its flank. The change is a signal of condition, and a chameleon in good condition is a measure of the forest itself, a sign of healthy insect prey along the branches and intact vegetation thick enough to feed it. The fossa sits at the top of this chain, and yet weighs less than a mid-sized dog, a top predator small enough to be lifted in two hands, balanced on an ecosystem of lemurs and insects and leaves that all depend on the same standing trees. Then the sifaka breaks, leaping for a far trunk, and the fossa is already gone after it, the long body slipping off the limb and into the grey canopy, swallowed by a forest where, until recently, no one had set down a single population number. The animal that the cameras had watched 1,000 times remained, in the most basic sense, uncounted. How many fossa move through Kirindy and through the dry forests beyond it, and whether that number was rising or falling, were questions the infrared frames could not answer. The traps could prove the fossa was there. They could not yet say how many there were, or for how much longer. By the early 1990s, the fossa had been known to Western science for almost 2 centuries, sketched into colonial gazetteers and held in a few museum cabinets, and almost nothing was known about how it lived. No one had counted them. No one knew the size of a home range, the path of a single animal across a season, or whether the population was holding or already in decline. In 1994, the American biologist Luke Dollar, working out of the field station at Kirindy alongside the German Primate Center, fitted the first radio collars on wild fossas in this forest, and the long work of counting began. A sedated animal weighed on a field scale in the half-light, a collar tightened to the right notch, the measurements entered by lamplight in a station logbook, and then, on release, the receiver in a researcher's hand catching the first slow pulse of a signal that until that morning had not existed. The forest the collars began to map was already disappearing. Madagascar has lost roughly 4/5 of the forest cover it carried at human arrival, and Kirindy itself, a dry, deciduous woodland of around 12,500 hectares in the Manabe region, is one of the last large fragments of its kind. The IUCN now lists the fossa as vulnerable and estimates fewer than 2,500 mature animals across the whole island. In 2015, the Malagasy state created the Manabe Anti-Mana protected area to hold the Kirindy region's forests together. Yet inside its boundaries, the clearing has continued, and the predator the island spent millions of years assembling now depends on a few thousand hectares that could be lost within a single generation. Where the early collars followed a few known animals, later camera trap surveys spread across the forest to estimate how many shared it, and the picture they returned was of a predator always rare and now rarer, holding on in a wood being measured even as it disappeared. The first published estimates put the Kirindy fossa population at fewer than 50 adults across the surveyed area, and similar work across the dry forests of western Madagascar suggested that on the whole island, the species held to scattered concentrations rather than to a continuous range. What the radio tracks revealed was that a single fossa could pass through territory measured not in hectares, but in tens of square kilometers, crossing the boundaries of any reserve in a night, dependent for its life on stretches of unbroken forest larger than most protected areas can guarantee. The animal that the cameras had been counting one frame at a time was an animal that could not be confined to any one frame. And the same fragmentation that made it photographable was the fragmentation that threatened it. The collars tracked the fossa, but the same forest carries a whole guild of smaller hunters that the research has counted alongside it. By day, the ring-tailed mongoose hunts the leaf litter, a slender, russet carnivore that takes insects, reptiles, and small mammals through the understory. Working the prey sizes the fossa never bothers to chase, holding to the daylight margins of a forest the larger hunter passes through at night. The Phanoloca, the island's small striped civet, and a separate, far smaller relative of the fossa, works the same ground after dark, padding after frogs and invertebrates along the trickle of seasonal streams. Alongside it moves the narrow-striped mongoose, a western specialist that hunts in small family bands at the margins of the same forest. And between them, the lower carnivore guild covers the hours and the prey sizes the fossa cannot reach. In the branches above, the grey mouse lemur, among the smallest primates on Earth at roughly 60 grams, holds still in a headlamp beam, a pair of reflective eyes the size of seed pearls. One of many nocturnal lemur species feeding through the dark canopy above the carnivore floor. And in the sandy soil below, the giant jumping rat, a rabbit-sized rodent found wild nowhere but these few forests of the Manabe, digs the deep burrows in which it pairs for life, endangered, narrow-ranged, and hunted by the same predator the collars were tracking. Every one of them was a line in the same ledger, a forest measured while it shrank. Far to the south stands a reserve where the lemurs have been studied without a break since 1963, longer than anywhere else on the island. And there, a different record of the fossa has been kept across the decades. Not in collars and maps, but in the alarm the lemurs themselves raise at the sight of it. Kirindy is a small private reserve in the far south of Madagascar, a strip of gallery forest along the Mandrea River, and it holds the longest unbroken record of any lemur population on the island. Since 1963, the ring-tailed lemurs here have been watched without a single year's gap, first by the primatologist Alison Jolly, whose study of them opened a field of science that had barely existed before her, and then by those who carried the work on across half a century. Her early account of these troops, published in 1966, became one of the founding works of lemur science, and the animals she described still move through the same gallery forest today. The ring-tailed lemur is the most familiar face Madagascar sends into the world. Grey and white, the long banded tail held upright like a flag as troops of a dozen or more cross the forest floor in the open, by day, on the ground, in a way almost no other lemur dares. That boldness carries a price. A primate that feeds in the open in daylight is a primate every hunter in the forest can see. And the ringtail has answered the danger not by hiding, but by talking. What Jolly and those after her recorded is a vocabulary built around the things that kill them. A ring-tailed troop does not raise one general cry of alarm. It keeps separate calls for separate deaths. A hunter seen overhead draws a sharp shriek that sends the troop diving downward into cover, low, beneath the branches where a stooping bird cannot follow. A hunter found on the ground draws a different call, a yapping bark that sends the same animals climbing upward into the trees, away from the jaws below. The two warnings carry opposite instructions because they answer opposite threats, and the young learn early which way to run for which sound. Researchers at Barenti have tested it directly, playing recorded calls back to the troops and watching them look up or scramble high on cue, reading in their reactions the shape of the predators the lemurs carry in their heads. The alarm is, in effect, a name, not for one individual, but for a kind of hunter, spoken the instant it appears. The call that sends them low has its targets. The Madagascar harrier hawk is a pale, long-legged raptor that works the canopy by climbing through it, reaching its double-jointed legs into tree hollows and nests to drag out fledglings and small mammals. A hunter that does not only stoop from above, but presses in among the branches themselves. Higher and faster, the Hengst's goshawk drives through the trees after lemurs nearly its own weight, one of the few raptors anywhere that takes primates from the canopy outright. Even a smaller bird shapes the chorus. The helmet vanga, a heavy-billed forest hunter found nowhere else on Earth, works the same trees for insects and reptiles. Against all of them, the upward-watching eye and the call that drives the troop down. But the call that sends the troop climbing names the older fear. The Fossa hunts here as it hunts at Kirindy, and to a troop of ring-tailed lemurs on the ground, it is the shape that empties the canopy of safety because it climbs as well as they do and comes down a trunk faster than they can flee up it. When the ground alarm sounds, the troop goes up, and yet up is exactly where the fossa is built to follow, which makes the warning less an escape than a call for distance and numbers. A dozen voices turning at once to face the one hunter no single lemur can outrun. The ringtail's two alarms map the whole danger of its world. Death from the air, death from the ground, and a separate name for each. Through the same gallery forest, move the brown lemurs and the sifaka above, and the ringtail troops below, feeding in the open on fallen fruit and tamarind pods, and the fossa counts every one of them as it passes. For most of the year, that ground hunter moves alone, a solitary threat tracked by 100 watching eyes. But once, as the dry season ends, the fossa breaks its own solitude, and the hunters of the forest gather at a single tree. In the dry forest, the year turns on water, and for most of it, the fossa lives alone, each animal moving through its own wide territory, crossing the paths of others, mostly as scent and warning. But as the first storms gather at the end of the dry season, in the months from October to December, that solitude breaks. The fossas of Kirindy begin to move toward one another, drawn to a few particular trees the forest has kept for this purpose across more years than any single fossa lives. The same stout limbs return to season after season, until the behavior belongs less to any one animal than to the place itself. High on a horizontal branch, roughly 20 meters above the ground, a female settles and waits, and her presence carries. Males arrive from across the forest, one after another, until as many as half a dozen gather at the foot of the tree, testing one another for position, calling, holding their ground through the heat of the day. The female mates with several of them in turn over the hours and days that follow, each pairing prolonged, sometimes lasting more than an hour, the choice largely hers. And when at last she comes down, another female climbs to the very same branch, and the assembly forms again beneath her. Across 1 to 2 weeks, a single tree can carry the breeding of much of the surrounding forest, an arrangement among the most unusual in the carnivore world, a solitary hunter made briefly, intensely social by one limb of wood. It is a thing that has to be watched to be believed, and watched it has been. Below these trees at Kirindy, the biologist Lana Lurs of the German Primate Center recorded the gatherings season by season through the late 2000s, counting the males that came, noting which climbed and which waited, building from patient observation the clearest account yet of how the island's largest carnivore reproduces. The tree stands at the center of a season, but the forest around it is what makes the season possible. And that forest is built of the fossa's prey. The Varro's sifaka is a white, long-limbed lemur that clings upright against the trunks and launches between them in leaps, clearing several meters at a stretch, crossing open ground when it must in a bounding sideways dance. Its name carries the sound of its alarm, a sharp "shif-ork" flung down through the canopy at the first sight of danger. And it is the animal the fossa's entire body is built to take. The reversible ankles, the long balancing tail, the head-first descent, all answers to the problem of a primate that lives precisely where no cat its size should be able to follow. The red-fronted brown lemur moves through the same canopy in groups, active by turns through day and night, the other staple that carries a fossa across the year. Lower still, coiled in the leaf litter, the Madagascar ground boa waits in patience for smaller prey, a constrictor of some 3 meters that hunts the very forest the fossa hunts, by stillness rather than pursuit. One forest feeds many hunters, and the one that gathers at the mating tree is only the largest among them. Lurs documented something further in these woods. Male fossas that hunt sifaka in pairs, 2 animals coordinating to bring down prey neither could master alone. A cooperation rare in a carnivore that lives otherwise apart, and a thread of the same impulse that draws them together at the tree. For the season at the branch and the hunt in the canopy are two faces of one fact. A predator the island assembled from a mongoose, holding on in a forest growing smaller around it, must still find prey enough to live and each other enough to breed, in the narrow window before the rains close the forest in. And so the year comes back to where it began. An hour before first light, a male crosses the dark floor of Kirindy, finds the base of the worn, horizontal branch his kind has returned to for generations, and climbs. Above him, where the canopy has only begun to grey, the females are already waiting. Deep in the rock of Tsingy, the cave crocodile still holds in water the sun has never reached. And at the field station, the receiver still waits for the next caller to speak. The forest at Kirindy grows smaller each year. The lemurs keep two names for two deaths. The mating tree stands where it stood. 88 million years of drift. Four-fifths of a forest gone. One predator the island built from a mongoose, and one branch it still climbs before the light. What the collars cannot yet say is how many seasons that tree has left. A single set of clawed tracks presses up a trunk, head first, into the dark ahead.